Hey everybody, William Warfield here with you, and man, we're getting ready for another exciting show here tonight on the PrepSpin podcast. And I got to tell you guys, this guy needs no introduction. Gary Ball going to be joining me here in a second as well. But we're going to have Dan Issell on the show here tonight with us. And, of course, you know, everybody knows Dan Issell, Kentucky's all-time leading scorer. He was an ABA champion as well in 1975. He was a six-time ABA All-Star. He was a ABA All-Star MVP back in 72, an NBA All-Star in 77. He made the ABA first team in 72, four-time All-ABA second team in 71, 73, 74, and 76. He was a Rookie of the Year in the ABA in 1971, and the ABA all-time team, as a matter of fact, getting that honor. He was a J. Walter Kennedy Citizenship Award winner in 1985. Man, this list continues to go on. His number 44 is retired by the Denver Nuggets. It's also retired by the Kentucky Wildcats. And without further ado, I want to bring Dan and Gary into the show. Guys, how's everything going?
Doing great.
I'm doing terrific. It's great to be with you all tonight.
Dan, we are truly blessed to have you here tonight. Hopefully, we can hit on several things. One of the big things is I'd like to talk about possibly bringing the NBA to Louisville. I know you got a passion for that. Gary's got a whole bunch of questions for you, and I do too. So maybe we can get right into it. Gary Ball, I'll let you start off.
Sounds good to me, Dan Issell. It's great to talk to you. I've been a fan for years. It's hard to believe that you were an All-American at Kentucky. 50 years ago? It's hard to believe that. 50 years ago.
It was hard for you, Gary. Imagine how I feel.
Two-time All-American. As a matter of fact, your senior year, you averaged, I believe, 36. Maravich averaged he led the nation. He averaged I think he led you by 10 points. Is that correct?
That's correct. I tell people, Gary, I was second in the nation in scoring and only lost the scoring championship by 10 points a game. Pete averaged 44, and I averaged almost 34.
Before you were averaging all those points, though, at Kentucky, I got to ask you, when did you start in basketball? What at an early age, and did you have any early mentors in basketball?
No, I really didn't play any organized basketball at all until I went out for my seventh grade basketball team. Didn't get to play much in junior high and started playing a little bit once I got to high school. What I really wanted to do was I've been a Chicago Cub fan my entire life. And I had dreams. I had dreams of being the shortstop for the Chicago Cubs. My hero growing up was Ernie Banks, the Hall of Famer that played for the Chicago Cubs. I wanted to take Ernie's place.
Well, Dan, you made instant fans with me and William because we're both huge Chicago Cubs fans. When they finally won the World Series a few years ago, I absolutely went nuts. I actually had a ticket for the World Series. I could have gone to a game, but I had to do a TV show here in Lexington, wasn't able to go. But what a thrill that was when we finally won that World Series.
And just night before last, Gary, ESPN played the entire game, and I sat in I sat in my recliner for 4 hours, watched the replay, and even though I knew the Cubs won, I still got nervous that when Cleveland tied it up.
Yeah,
and that was something else. Seeing the Cubs win it, and all that talk about the curse of the goat and all that good stuff that goes along with it. And the guy interfering with Moses Alou, Bartman, man, I love the Cubs. I've always have loved the Cubs. Now, my favorite player of all time was Ryan Sandberg growing up.
Yeah. He was a good one. In fact, I passed my love for the Chicago Cubs on to my son, Scott, and his oldest son is named Brody Ryan Issell, R-Y-N-E, after Ryan Sandberg. And I was lucky enough to get a hold of the Cub organization, and I have a personalized autographed jersey for Brody that hangs in his bedroom, signed by Ryan Sandberg.
Nice.
Yeah, Ron Santo and Kessinger were two of my favorite Cubs. They're two of my all-time favorites. Dan, you're kind of like Dave Cowens. We had Cowens on our show a couple of weeks ago. He didn't start playing basketball till he was in senior in high school, and he really didn't develop it until he got to Florida State. And then, of course, when he's with the Celtics, just a great ball player. But that's kind of like you. So you grew up in Batavia High School in Illinois. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
What was it like? What was it like growing up in Batavia, Illinois?
We had, when I was there, it was a town of only about 7,500 people on the far western suburbs of Chicago. I think we had about 450 people in our high school, all 4 grades combined. But we had some unbelievable athletes. My backdoor neighbor, our backyards butted up against each other, was Kenny Anderson, who was quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals for about 15 years. Took them to their first Super Bowl. We had a couple of brothers who played professional baseball, and the entire social calendar of Batavia was built around the high school athletics, and it was a great place to grow up. We had some really good teams. At that time, there was only one class in Illinois, and we were the last district team, last small school eliminated from the state tournament, both my junior and senior years in high school. So have a lot of fond memories of Batavia High School.
Yeah, I did not realize that you played the same high school, or that Kenny Anderson. Know Kenny well. When I was up in Cincinnati, I covered the Bengals, and a good friend of mine was Anthony Munoz. He protected Kenny Anderson. Of course, on the offensive line, he was the left tackle, 78. Yeah. Kenny Anderson, just a great Bengal player, and what a great athlete to come out of your hometown.
Yeah, it was amazing that we had that many professional athletes come at the same time from such a small town.
Wow. So what was it like being recruited out of Batavia there, by the all-time famous, Adolph Rupp? What was it like being recruited by Kentucky and just the historic program that Kentucky is?
Yeah, well, it was obviously a great honor to be recruited by the University of Kentucky, but I've told this story on several occasions. I was not Kentucky's first choice at center that year. In fact, I wasn't even their second choice. Their first choice was a fellow by the name of I'm sorry. He wound up going to Dayton and played at Dayton. Joe Bergman was their second choice, and he wound up going, I believe, to Iowa or Iowa State. And I was I came to Lexington on my recruiting trip and had a great time and met some of my what would be my teammates there. But I went back to Batavia thinking I would make a choice between going to Northwestern, which is where my folks wanted me to go, and the University of Wisconsin. I actually wound up signing a Big Ten letter of intent to go to the University of Wisconsin. But when those two other centers signed with other schools, then Kentucky picked up their recruiting. And I can remember to this day my father coming into my bedroom and saying, if you're serious about this basketball stuff, at that time, Kentucky had more All-Americans and more professional players than any other school. He said, you better take another look at Kentucky. And, of course, it wound up being the very best decision I made.
Yeah, there's a story that I've heard about, how Adolph Rupp kind of introduced you to the teammates once you got into the lineup there at Kentucky. There's a quote that's here on Wikipedia, as a matter of fact, as I'm looking at it. It says, that Adolph Rupp is said this, this guy is going to be Kentucky's all-time leading scorer by the time he's through here. I would like for you guys to meet him. Talking about giving you the ball.
That was actually against Notre Dame, and about 5 minutes into the game, I hadn't taken a shot, and Coach Rupp called timeout, and that's exactly what he said to my teammates. He said, "This is Dan Issell. I'd like to introduce him to you. He's going to be the all-time leading scorer here. Now throw him the basketball."
And they did.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Playing against a guy, and you were a prolific scorer too, and an All-American, Pistol Pete Maravich. Guys, you were in some those are the TV games I remember for some reason, because it seemed like Pistol Pete would always have 60 points. You would have like 50 or 45 or 50, but you guys would always beat them by double digits. So, but what was the philosophy going up against? What was Adolph Rupp's philosophy going up against Pete Maravich?
Yeah, a lot of the coaches in the SEC would try to devise defenses to stop Pete. They'd play the triangle and two or a box and one. But Pete was so clever with the basketball. He was the best ball handler and passer that I've ever seen. Magic Johnson, any of them. Pete was the best. And he was clever enough on the dribble that you could run all five guys at him and he could get an open shot. And so Coach Rupp's philosophy was, we're going to let Pete get his because we can't stop him. We're just going to make sure nobody else on the team beats us. And in the 6 games that we played head-to-head, because we were, the same year, in the 6 games we played head-to-head, Pete averaged 52 points a game in those 6 games. He got 63. Wow. He got 63 the last time we played him down in Baton Rouge. And but the closest that LSU ever came to beating us in those 6 games was 9 points. So Coach Rupp knew what he was doing. We couldn't stop Pete, but we stopped everybody else.
You averaged. Yeah, I was going to say you were a pretty good scorer too there at the college level. Averaging 25.7 points per game. That was pretty good there. But like Gary had mentioned earlier, UK's all-time leading scorer. You held the all-time points in a single game for 4 decades until Jody Meeks was able to get 54. You had 51 prior to that. Were you on hand, by the way, during when Jody passed that, or did you ever talk to Jody about that?
Yeah, I sure did. I remember it very well. My wife and I were traveling. We were in a hotel room in Wyoming, and we watched the game. And at halftime, I told Sherry, I said, I think Meeks has got a shot to break this record. And after I called him the next morning and congratulated him, and then got a chance to meet him a month or so later, and was really happy for him, for the young man. He's a great young man, and we stayed in touch. And I saw him when he came through Denver on several occasions playing with different NBA teams. But I watched every minute of that game. I was happy for him. that record had stood long enough. It was nice somebody else had a chance to hold it.
Gary?
Does it surprise you, Dan Issell, that you're still the all-time leading scorer in Kentucky, or do you think that's a indication of the guys they don't stick around like Kentucky? I mean, that was for 3 years for you, right? You couldn't play as a freshman, is that right? So 3 years.
Yeah, that's correct. Freshmen were still ineligible at that point. We had a freshman team, and we were pretty good. We had some really good players on that team. Had Mike Pratt, who was Mr. Basketball in Ohio, Mike Casey, who was Mr. Basketball in Kentucky. In fact, I think we had almost the entire first two teams of the all-state Kentucky high school team. We had 12 guys on scholarship my freshman year. Yeah, we played. I played 3 years. To answer your question, Gary, I was surprised that it lasted through people like Kenny Walker, Goose Givens, Kevin Greavy. I thought for sure one of those guys would have a real good chance of breaking it. When that didn't happen, I don't know that record will ever be broken now, because, as you said, anybody that's good enough to break that record, they'll be gone after a year, certainly after two. And so that record might last a long, long time.
As a former NBA coach yourself, and NBA, you know the NBA as well as anybody. Guys like Montgomery, I think Nick Richards did the right thing. His may never be higher, but the guys from Kentucky that went out this year, do you agree that they all should have gone out?
Yeah, I wish none of them would go out. I tried to talk. I've been a friend of Rex Chapman's. My first year with the Colonels, his father Wayne was with the Colonels, so I've known Rex since he was about 7 years old. I tried to talk him out of leaving early. To me, I was blessed to play 25 years of organized basketball from 7th grade through 15 years as a pro, and easily my 4 favorite years of my basketball career were the 4 years I spent at UK. So I'd love to see everybody experience that. I understand the financial situation now. A lot of these players, have an opportunity to set their families up for life. But if I was counseling one of these young men, if you're not a lottery pick, I don't think you should go. Just to be drafted late in the first round or in the second round, if you have college eligibility and you don't have the financial pressures of having to sign a contract, I wouldn't advise anybody to go if they weren't a lottery pick.
Let's talk about.
And then, go ahead, William.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to touch on this because if we rewind back to 1970. You were actually the 122nd overall pick because they had more than 2 rounds back then. You were picked up in the 8th round, and you were selected by the Detroit Pistons. Take us back to that and how all that went down.
Yeah, well, the reason I was an 8th round pick in the NBA was because I'd already signed my contract with the Kentucky Colonels.
Okay.
When the NBA had their draft. I was first team All-American, and so I think I would have, had I not signed my contract with the Colonels, I think I would have gone before the 8th round. But anyway.
Oh yeah.
Cliff Hagan, who you all know as a great former UK player, Cliff at the time in 1970 was coach of the Dallas Chaparrals. In a year or two after that would become the San Antonio Spurs. And Cliff called me up after my senior year was over, after we lost to Jacksonville, and he said, "Dan, we have your great team there." I said, "Well, in 1970, the only emergency was the team in the age with two of the best teams because for a lot of reasons, I'd fallen in
There are a
love
lot of
with
great players in that
had a chance to go right up the road 75
all right.
miles and talk and play that.
And you had Dr. J.
Absolutely happy. And so, it's the reason that the NBA at that time, your college class
were a good fit for you, especially when they got in with the
didn't matter if you went to college or not.
really good team.
But your college, you hear this the other day, I think it was Friday, was the 49th anniversary of the college winning championship. And you're a regular Chinese players, unbelievable players like the Rock Wars, and Nate Smith, George the team where the other, and that's why I say and when the merger came in 1976, there were as many great basketball players in the ABA as there was the NBA.
What would you say you took from Adolph Rupp, from all your Hubie Brown, all your great coaches, your high school coach, Joe B. Hall, of course, Coach Hall? We did a radio show for years, and he had you on that show. I know you're a big Joe Hall fan, but what would you say you took from all those coaches that made you the great coach you were when you finally coached in your career?
Well, that's awful kind of you. I think to call me a great coach is stretching it a little bit. I might have been mediocre at best, but you're right. I was fortunate to play for a number of great coaches, Hall of Fame coaches, 4 of them, I believe. It started out back at Batavia with my high school coach, Don Vanderschnick, and he instilled in me, and I still think to this day, this is the most important ingredient you can have, because no matter how talented you are, at some level, you're going to come up against somebody just as talented as you are. And at that point, it's who's willing to work the hardest. And I would say of all the great coaches I played for, especially early on with Coach Vanderschnick in Batavia, and Adolph Rupp at Kentucky, it was the great work ethic that they instilled in me. And, some nights it was good, some nights it wasn't so good, but at least I'd walk off the court after every game knowing I had given the very best I could possibly give.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot, William. I don't know, but to listen to Dan, that reminds me a lot of Dave Cowens. Dave Cowan, and you know this too well, Dan. Dave Cowan, same kind of work ethic you did, and same kind of if you put 2 knee pads on Cowens, he would clean the floor for you out there. I mean, he was just that kind of guy. Hustled out for a 6'9" guy. He just hustled like no other. It's like you did.
I've always had a kinsmanship for Dave Cowens. Number 1, he's a Kentucky boy. Number 2, he had to play center in the NBA at 6'9". I know exactly what that's like. And believe it or not, Gary, we were born on the exact same day. Cowens and I have the exact same birth date, October 25th, 1948.
Well, I've gotten to know Dave just through Dave Gaduli. Dave went to high school with Cowens, and that's how I got to know Dave. We got him on the show a few weeks ago, and he was just like you, just a knowledge of basketball, and played for a great coach. But he talked about his days at Florida State, and really that's when Cowens kind of came into his own, like you did at Kentucky. Adolph Rupp I think Adolph Rupp knew the talented player. He knew what kind of talent he had, but it's one thing to have that talent. It's one thing to get that talent to perform at the level you did. But Adolph Rupp was a master, I think, at that, at bringing those players up. Well, they didn't even know they had.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And Coach Rupp, there's a certain kind of player that couldn't play for Coach Rupp. I mean, Coach Rupp, some players need a pat on the back, some need a kick in the tail to be motivated. And Coach Rupp's philosophy was, I'm going to kick everybody in the tail, and if they're not tough enough to take it, I don't want them on my team anyway. So he he always had hard workers and always got the very most out of their talent.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, when we look back at the ABA era, it's often, when you talk about, a lot of people saying, well, who's the greatest of all time now? And they always talk about, the Jordan era. They always talk about LeBron James or, that's the majority of the talk going on. But some of those players that played in the ABA back in the 70s specifically, I mean, there was a lot of great players there, and they're often forgotten, Dan. And, I think it's great that we can highlight them here tonight with you on the show and
Yeah.
you being one of them.
Yeah.
Who were some of the greatest players that you played against and played with?
Yeah, I had that conversation just today. David Thompson, who you all might remember, went to North Carolina State, won an NCAA championship, was a teammate of mine here in Denver. And David was just a quiet country boy, one of the most talented players I've ever seen. And of course, David had his own demons and wound up pretty much hooked on drugs. But I tell people, if he had been able to stay clean, if he had been able to stay away from that, we'd be talking about David Thompson in the exact same way that we talk about those players you just mentioned, Michael and LeBron, because he was something special, but he only was able to show it for a very short time. And then some of the players that we mentioned, Julius Erving. I saw Julius Erving do things early in his career when he played for the Virginia Squires that I've never seen anybody else do. I mean, I've seen him dunk over Artis Gilmore, and I can't remember anybody ever dunking over Artis Gilmore. George Gervin was an unbelievable scorer. We're coming down. This had to be in the early 70s. We're playing the last game of the year, and David Thompson and George Gervin are fighting for the NBA scoring championship. We have an afternoon game in Detroit, and David gets 73. We all were feeding him. In fact, it was the only game in my long career that I ever had double-digit assists. I had 10 assists that game because we were feeding David to try and win the scoring championship. And that night, the Spurs played, and Gervin got 65 points to win the championship and sat out the fourth quarter. He scored 65 points in 3 quarters. And so there were some unbelievable players that began their careers in the ABA.
Yeah.
Why do you think the ABA didn't get the credit it deserves? I mean, you talk about Julius Erving, Gervin, and all those guys, yourself, Artis Gilmore. Why do you think the ABA didn't get the credit it really deserved?
Yeah, for several reasons. Of course, the NBA would hardly acknowledge that the ABA existed. It's interesting that a lot of the things you see in the NBA in the NBA game today came straight from the ABA. The three-point line originated in the ABA. The wide open up and down style of basketball. In those days, the NBA walked the ball up the court and tried to force it into somebody in a low post. Wasn't very entertaining brand of basketball. All-Star Weekend, the slam dunk contest, that all originated in the ABA. The first slam dunk contest was in 1975, the ABA All-Star Game here in Denver. But it was only around for a short time. And the reason that even though it had all those great players, we were never able to get a full season national TV contract. And we played in smaller markets, didn't have much exposure. And people that really follow basketball know how good the ABA was, but the general fan would have no idea.
It seemed like the ABA was a lot more connected to the fan back then, of what everybody wants. When you talk about the slam dunk, when you talk about, the floating to the rim type of shots and just the electricity that went into the game of basketball back then.
Yeah, and like I say, if you look at today's game, it looks a whole lot more like the way the ABA played back in that time than the way the NBA played.
Yeah. Yeah, I look at Michael Jordan's game, and he totally is the ABA playing in NBA, his career. Michael Jordan's a prime example of that. The way he transitioned, the way he got the ball up the floor and then got up through there for a fast break, that was all ABA.
Yeah, you've heard the old line about the only guy who could hold Michael Jordan under 20 points a game was Dean Smith. I mean, he didn't have that freedom when he was in North Carolina. And, of course, yeah. Michael was a great player, was an All-American. But, the fact that he was the third pick in the NBA draft kind of shows that not everybody knew Michael Jordan was going to be Michael Jordan.
Yeah, do you guys remember the two guys that were drafted ahead of him? I believe it was, Bowie and Olajuwon. Is that right?
Yeah, Elijah went to Houston, and again, that's understandable because of the focus on the big men at that time, exactly. And so, it's understandable that Olajuwon was the first pick, but the Portland had Clyde Drexler, and I know that Sam takes a lot of heat for being drafted in front of Michael Jordan, but Sam was very injury prone and never had a chance to prove his worth in the NBA. But, again, if you think the game is built around big men and you've already got a shooting guard, it would make sense to take Sam over Michael at that point.
Yeah, you mentioned Clyde Drexler, and you're right. Him and Jordan had their game was quite a lot alike, and a lot of people don't realize that, but when you talk about, going back and looking at some of those Jordan, Bulls finals when they played against Portland, you kind of see that against each other there.
Yeah, and you could see why if you had Clyde on your roster, you could see why, you wouldn't go out of your way to draft a Michael Jordan.
Yeah. Dan, if you were an NBA, we'll talk about this ABA, I said ABA, that NBA or whatever type team you're trying to bring to Kentucky, NBA team. If you were starting an NBA team and you could only pick Kentucky players, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'll say, who would be your first five and your second five of just Kentucky? Obviously, Anthony Davis is an obvious one. Okay, I'll give you that one. But
I think Anthony would be the first pick. I think Jay Morant might be the second pick if we can count him as a Kentucky guy. Jamal Murray is having a great career here with the Nuggets. He's going to be a special player, and of course, and now I can't remember his name. The U of L kid that plays for the Utah Jazz. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, hold on a second. I'll get that for you. You can go ahead and give us the next one while I look that up. But yeah, I know.
Yeah, those are good picks. I would go with Jay Morant too. Neil Bradley would kill me if I didn't say Jay Morant. That's his guy right there. Neil does the play-by-play for the Murray State Racers, and he's just he should have been John Morant's agent. But anyway, other Kentucky,
Donovan Mitchell.
Donovan Mitchell. I'm sorry. My apologies. I don't know why that skipped my mind, but Donovan's a heck of a player too. So I'd have to put the U of L guy on there. After that, some of the great. There are some great players that came out of Kentucky. Fox would probably be on that list, and who else am I forgetting? But it'd be easy. It'd be easy to make an NBA roster out of kids that played for Kentucky colleges.
Yeah, and of course, we're forgetting about Karl Towns.
Oh yeah. Karl unfortunately plays for a team that isn't very good. He's a whale of a player, but for some reason the Timberwolves can't seem to get out of their own way. So you're right. He would have to be. He might even be on the first five.
of course, Davis made sure that he was out of a bad team. The Pelicans, they can have the Zion Williams guy. They can have it because they won't win anything. So, but now Davis is with LeBron and the Lakers. Do you think they need that as a NBA and ABA? Do you think they need that third component to be a championship team, or are they already a championship caliber team? The Lakers.
No, you're right. It's always great to have that third go-to guy. But I think they're already a championship caliber team. I mean, before the season was brought to an end by COVID-19, I thought that Milwaukee, maybe Boston in the East, were the class there. And then the same two teams that play in the Staples Center, the Lakers and the Clippers, I think they would have contended for the championship, and hopefully we'll still get a chance this year to see all of that play out.
Yeah, and don't forget, Gary, they got Dwight Howard and Rajon Rondo on that team too. I know they're a little older guys, but they can certainly play. They can be that third guy.
Rondo's on the way down. He's a great player when he's with the Celtics. Helped them win a championship. He can still get still a good assist man, but Rondo's not he's not the Chris Paul point guard or somebody like that. He's not at that level. But I'll give Dan I'll give him LeBron and Anthony Davis. I think they are with just those two guys. I think right now they're a championship caliber team. But the Clippers are very good. The Clippers, and they got to get to that conference first.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what do you think? And we're totally going to touch on the NBA in Louisville. I think that's a hot topic that we want to discuss. But what do you think, considering the circumstances right now with this whole COVID situation, the NBA wanting to play down in Walt Disney World and try to get some kind of season going on there, or pick up where they left off?
Yeah, I think it's important for a number of reasons. I think that just there's so many people in this country right now that don't feel that they have any control over what's going on. And so I'm a huge horse racing fan, and horse racing has opened up, albeit without any fans. I mean, Churchill's running, Santa Anita's running. They're going to open up New York next week. Keeneland just got permission to hold a 5-day meet in July and run a lot of their important stake races. I think it's important for our culture and our people that we get professional sports back and get it back as quickly as we can. So even if there's nobody in the stands, even if they're playing 5 games a day at 1 or 2 locations, I think it's important that we get it started up again and have at least some kind of a finality to the NBA season.
Yeah, you had mentioned TV contracts with the ABA earlier, and that's really what the NBA is hoping to accomplish, I think, by moving it to Walt Disney World, is to get those 70 games in that they've promised the network, so that that's a big chunk of money for the league, right?
No question about it. The TV, the media rights supply the league with just as much, if not more, money than ticket sales and parking and concessions do. So with the lost revenue that the NBA owners are experiencing now, it's really important, I think, that we get this season back underway and get it back on television.
Yeah. Dan, let's talk about this NBA. The leader of this organization, I think they made you president of this organization. It's going to get this NBA. Whereabouts do you guys stand right now, and what are you looking for to get this NBA team back in Kentucky?
Yeah, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, I was approached by a group in Louisville, and I think at that point there was a lot of energy behind the NBA putting a team in Seattle, and so I think this group thought that expansion was a little more inevitable than it probably really was. And what we're charged with is making sure if and when the NBA expands. Now, the NBA's position is expansion isn't on the table, but we've been charged with if and when the NBA expands, we're going to have a very compelling argument as to why the NBA should be in Louisville. And because of this COVID-19 situation, because of the lost revenue, that could mean that expansion comes quicker, because expansion fees are not BRI, basketball-related income. Basketball-related income, the television, the ticket sales, all of that has to be split 50-50 with the players. That's in the collective bargaining agreement. Expansion fees are not RBI. And so those go 100% to the owner's pocket. So maybe expansion might be a little closer now. There'll certainly be a lot of competition, but we've put together a great organization. I would ask that if your listeners have any interest in the NBA coming to Louisville and coming to the state of Kentucky, we have a very professionally done website, NBA 2 Lou, NBA the number 2 Lou, and you can go there and you can sign up for nothing and be part of our support group, or we have an ambassador club for an annual fee. You can be involved in some of our parties and some of our meetings and some of our barrel picks. So NBA to Lou will tell you a lot about what we're doing and how we think we can get the NBA to Kentucky.
I'm going to pull up that website here and just kind of show everybody. It is a pretty nice website, Dan. You guys got a really good website designer here. But yeah, all the information right here. Has there been any talk about if the NBA was to come here, what the team's name would be? The Louisville what?
I of course would like it to see it called the Kentucky Colonels, just like our ABA team. But we'll let him or her or they, whoever writes the check, we'll let them decide how they want the team to be named. One of the big things we have going for us is the Yum Center. Jim Host has told me on several occasions the Yum Center was designed and built with the idea of eventually housing an NBA team. A lot of people don't know this. There's a separate practice facility on the same level as the arena floor. It has all of the amenities that an NBA team could want in an arena. And I think the Yum Center would automatically be one of the top 6 or 7 arenas in the NBA. So we've got a number of things, not to mention the passion that Kentuckians have for their basketball. And as you were saying earlier, Gary, if we could put a couple of UK players on the roster, a couple of U of L players, I think it would be hugely supported.
Yeah. So
we did that with an arena team. The Kentucky Horsemen, we played at Rupp Arena, brought in Dusty Bonner as a quarterback. We won a national championship with Dusty.
So there's several cities, I think, that are competing against Louisville right now. One being, like as you mentioned, Seattle. I think Las Vegas is making a big case for a team now too. When you talk about them bringing in the NFL, they've got the NHL there that's pretty established now.
William, there's going to be a lot of competition if the NBA does decide to expand. I mean, you hear Vancouver, Seattle, San Diego, Las Vegas, Kansas City, Mexico City. There'll be a lot of competition, but I think you're right. A lot of people think that Seattle is a done deal. I'm not so sure. The success that professional sports are having in Las Vegas, that might be the toughest competition. Having said that, the NBA has always had a lot of success when they're in a market where they're the only one of the top 4 major league teams represented. You look at Oklahoma City, you look at San Antonio, you look at Salt Lake City, even Sacramento, and we've kind of modeled our efforts after what went on in Oklahoma City. And if Oklahoma City can show the kind of support that they showed first for New Orleans when they had to move to Oklahoma City because of Hurricane Katrina, and then the way they've supported the Thunder since they got there. If Oklahoma City can support a team like they do, there's no doubt in my mind that Louisville, Kentucky, and the Commonwealth can support an NBA team as well.
Yeah, I
Dan, you
totally agree.
mentioned, yeah, I agree too. You mentioned Jim Host earlier. If ever there was a marketing guy that got things going and helped with that Yum Center like Jim Host did, that is, I've been in that arena. That's one of the most beautiful basketball facilities in the country. But what you need, Dan, as you know as well as I do, you need that Mark Cuban type guy that can write that check. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
You know
And
what?
it's funny, Gary, when I first took this job, I thought that would be the toughest part of it. But you'd be amazed at how many people out there have billions of dollars that would like to own a professional sports team. It's unbelievable. We have 7 different individuals and groups under non-disclosure agreements. The problem is they get really enthusiastic about it, and then they say, yeah, this is great, let's do this. When will it happen? And you have to say, well, I'm really not sure. And so they lose interest real quick. But when that opportunity comes, there's no doubt in my mind we'll be able to find people like Mark Cuban and others, other owners that are willing to step up and write that check.
Yeah.
I've got
What was it like?
I got a question coming in here, and Jessica wants to know: did you ever get a chance to play at Rupp Arena or coach at Rupp Arena? I know it was built in '77, Jessica. So I'm not sure if you ever coached there or was able to play maybe a charity game or something like that on that floor.
No, I never was able to play at Rupp Arena. When we were with the Colonels in early '70s, a tornado hit Freedom Hall, took the roof off of Freedom Hall, and we were in the middle of the playoffs, and so we did wind up playing some ABA playoff games at Memorial Coliseum when I was with the Colonels, but I never had a chance to coach or play in Rupp Arena.
Okay. Gary Ball.
Dan, you mentioned Mike Pratt. You mentioned Carrier. Some of those guys that you played with. Was that the biggest reason why you wanted to go to the Colonels? Was all these UK guys were also going to be Colonels, Kentucky Colonels?
Well, Louis Dampier and I had become very good friends. Louis was a senior. Louis was a senior when I was a freshman, and for some reason he kind of took me under his wing, and we were really close and stayed close while he was with the Colonels early on, while I was still at Kentucky. And then Mike Pratt and I kind of went as a package deal. But I would say the biggest reason that I signed with the Colonels is the fact that I got to stay in the state of Kentucky and continue my basketball career.
Yeah. And it didn't hurt that your lovely wife, Sherry, at Kentucky either, University of Kentucky.
Yeah. Yep.
What was it like being, this is another question coming in here, but what is it like being named the Horse? And they talk about, you were kind of the Iron Man of your generation there because you only missed 24 games in your professional career. You played over 1,200 of them, only missed 24 games.
Dave Cowens, by the way, before you answer, Dan, Dave Cowens said you were the best player to ever come out of Kentucky.
Well, that's very kind. I appreciate that. He probably is a little biased toward us old guys, but the nickname came from one night I was playing for the Nuggets and had a decent game, and the next morning in the paper they said I played like a thoroughbred. And one of the guys in the locker room said, I'd say it was more like a Clydesdale than a thoroughbred. And the Clydesdale became the Horse, and unfortunately it stuck. But William, you were nice enough to, at the beginning, name a number of the stats that were compiled during my career. But one of the ones I'm most proud of is the one that you just mentioned. In 15 years of professional basketball, I never missed 2 games in a row. And, a couple of those games were for the birth of my children, and never suffered a major injury. And like I said earlier, some nights it was good, some nights it stunk, but at least I was out there trying as hard as I could.
Well, Dan Issell, I paid attention. Did you not say your favorite Cubs player was Ernie Banks?
Ernie Banks.
And what did he always say? Let's play too.
Let's play too.
That's good.
Go ahead, William.
Just real quick, again, another question here, and it happens to pertain to the Cubs. What's your if you were to put 9 players in the field there at each position for the Cubs, will you be able to do that right now and say who your favorite one at each position would be?
Ooh, that's interesting. Of course, Ernie would be the shortstop. He wound up his career at first base, but Ernie would be the shortstop. Ron Santo would be the
third baseman.
Would be the third baseman. Second baseman, I'd have to go with Ryan Sandberg. First base would either be Mark Grace or
Rizzo.
I think I'll put Mark Grace. The outfield, Dawson. I'm not going to put Sammy on there because there's too many questions about what Sammy was taking when he was knocking the ball over and one of my favorite catchers was Jody Davis. I love Jody Davis, and of course the pitcher. Yeah, the pitcher would be either Fergie Jenkins or Greg Maddux. I guess I'd have to take Fergie because he had a longer career with the Cubs. Don Kessinger, you mentioned earlier, Gary. Don Kessinger went to Ole Miss, and my senior year, when I broke the single game scoring record and the career scoring record in the same game at Ole Miss, and my father was in the stands, which really tickled me. But I was almost as excited because Don Kessinger was at that game as well. So, so that'd be my all-time Cub team.
Awesome. That is awesome.
That's an awesome team. You know your Cubbies.
Yeah.
And you know what? And nobody, I know that you can say what you want to about Harry Carey, but I know as a young man you had to listen to him, Dan. And even, older, as we got older, we listened to him. I love the way Harry Carey had fun with the game. I mean, he wasn't a play-by-play guy like like Vin Scully or like a Hall of Fame. But you know what? Nobody could tell you about the Cubs better than Harry Carey. And the Cubs win. Everybody loved Harry. Everybody.
We were really blessed because before Harry, we had another Hall of Fame announcer in Jack Brickhouse. And Jack Brickhouse was a tremendous announcer for the Cubs. He did the Cubs and the Bears. And so we were really fortunate. We had some really good announcers growing up listening to the Cubs.
Yeah, I loved Harry Carey. I'm just a big Harry Carey fan. I don't know why, but God rest his soul.
Yeah.
You go to Wrigley Field nowadays, and we totally got off topic with baseball here, but if you go to Wrigley Field nowadays, even before the game starts, they play the Harry Carey Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and it's just a beautiful – I mean, the sound in Wrigley Field is unlike any other stadium besides Fenway Park in Boston. Kind of get the same feeling there, but there's just that old sound in that stadium.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you, Dan. I agree with you, Dan. I think we need sports to come back. We need to grab that, but we also need high school sports to come back. I mean, William and I we do high school in the state of Kentucky. William streams all the state events. I announced the baseball, football, all the state championships. We need the high school, and this COVID thing is it's just been something we've never experienced. I mean, 911 doesn't even come close to this stuff.
No, it's unbelievable. I have a grandson who just finished his junior year, and he's a baseball pitcher. My son-in-law was a pitcher at Northwestern. That's where he and my daughter met. And my grandson is a pitcher at Valor High School here in Denver, and he's being recruited by some schools. And it's really they just moved the no contact back to the end of August. So all of these tournaments and camps that these young men were going to this summer to get that exposure to the college coaches, that's all been wrecked by this too. So it's very, very important that everything get back to normal again.
My wife's father went to Northwestern University, so it's a small
academic institution. And when my daughter
in the family, that's good. That's a great school. Well, Dan, we really appreciate it. Anything else we didn't cover, Dan or William, that we need to cover?
I really appreciate you all having me on and giving a chance to mention NBA to Lou. Go to the website, see what we're doing, and it's always good. Let's hope we get back to normal real quick.
Amen, Dan.
Definitely amen to that. And Dan Issell, you're the best. We appreciate you, and still the all-time leading scorer at the University of Kentucky.
Thank you, guys. You have a good night.
Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you. All right, Gary, that's going to do it for us here tonight on the podcast. Again, Dan Issell joining us here tonight. NBATulul.com. If you go NBA, the number 2, and then Lou, LOU.com. You can check that out. Let's try to get that. Man, I'd love to see the NBA to Louisville, wouldn't you, Gary?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a great fit.
Yeah. Man, that was awesome. Another great show here tonight, and we'll do it again next Thursday.
Okay, we're gonna wrap it up. So have a good show, William, and thanks to Dan Issell. He was great. We appreciate all his. He's still the number 1 leading scorer at the University of Kentucky.
Yes, he is. All right, that's going to do it for us here tonight. Thanks everybody for tuning in. So long, everybody.